Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining Protect Our Province BC today, Wednesday, June 28th, 2023, for our 25th briefing titled Unsafe September, It Doesn't Have to Be This Way. My name is Dr. Karina Zeidler. I am a family physician in Vancouver and one of the co-founders of Protect Our Province BC, which is a volunteer grassroots group of physicians, nurses, health communicators, disability justice advocates, and engineers, all working together to bring you the latest science related to COVID and to advocate for ongoing protections. I was just thinking today about how we started POP BC in the fall of 2021 because we were driven by wanting to protect children and school staff against COVID and advocate for more protections. And here we are 2 years later, doing the same thing and asking for many of the same things. Next slide, please. And so I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement to recognize that the work of Protect BC takes place on the ancestral, unceded, and stolen land belonging to many different Indigenous peoples in the place we now call British Columbia. I am currently located on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations here in what we call Vancouver. I would also like to take a minute today to commemorate the at least 619 people who died in 1 week back in 2021 because of the heat dome and not being able to escape the heat. This was a massive failure on the part of public health and our government, and although they have announced 8,000 ACs, it is wholly inadequate response. People deserve better. First slide, please. And so the topic for today is about how we can prepare for the upcoming fall 2023 return to school, given the history of last fall's tripledemic with RSV, flu, and COVID. Although public health has been working tirelessly to minimize the health, both in the short and long term of COVID, particularly in children, it continues to cause significant illness with long-term effects. And we'll be touching on this today. First, by starting to review what happened last fall, what people should continue to care about, and what should be done ahead of the next school year in the fall of 2023. And so with that, we have our first speaker. Can I have the next slide, please? So Jaclyn Ferreira is a member of Protect Our Province BC. She is a disability, rare disease, and education advocate and the mother of 3 delightful children. Hi, Jaclyn. Lovely to see you.
Hi, Karina. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. And thanks for having me today.
Absolutely.
I'm gonna just dive right in. So the 2022-2023 school year, which is just wrapping up, was the worst for the health of BC's children since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As kids, many now with COVID-weakened immune systems, face down a tripledemic comprised of COVID-19, influenza, and RSV. So first slide. As you can see, the fall saw a sharp and earlier than normal rise in pediatric respiratory illnesses and hospitalizations, with our pediatric ERs overstretched and overflowing, necessitating the opening of expansion units to accommodate sick children seeking care, parents being discouraged from seeking hospital-based care for their children, and prolonged ER wait times far exceeding what could be considered tenable, which stretched out to last for the entirety of the respiratory season. Teachers and students had higher rates of absence this school year, with schools frequently struggling to fill teaching positions. Parents were forced to miss work repeatedly to care for their children while dealing with a shortage of pediatric Tylenol, ibuprofen, and cold medicines. Next slide. Children in BC were without masks for the entirety of this school year, and most of them for most of the pandemic, after only having had a blanket K-12 masking directive briefly in the preceding school year from October 2021 to March of 2022. And most were without adequate ventilation and filtration, with no transparency on ventilation upgrades from school boards or government, and HEPA filters and do-it-yourself Corsi Rosenthal boxes to filter classroom air being refused by schools, in spite of years-long parent advocacy to see them placed in their children's classrooms. Essentially, BC's kids were tripledemic sitting ducks, and tragically, 6 children paid for this with their lives in a short 2-week span in November of 2022. Of the 8 children reported to have died of influenza during the 2022-2023 flu season in Canada, 3/4 of them were in British Columbia, roughly twice the number BC would normally expect to see in a pre-pandemic flu season. But did it have to be this way? Next slide. The 2022 winter season in the Southern Hemisphere saw unprecedented rates of pediatric illnesses and hospitalizations. There was no reason to presume that the same fate wouldn't face BC's children in our then upcoming winter season, but we ignored the signals. Flash forward to the Southern Hemisphere right now in their winter of 2023, and we are seeing similar patterns emerging. Next slide. Australia is reporting at least 3,000 cases of COVID per day. Hospitals in Canberra are seeing 3 times the pediatric admissions than they normally would at this time of year due to a respiratory season that started sharply and early in May. In early June, the Pan American Health Organization and WHO declared a significant growth in RSV hospitalizations beginning in April in Brazil, where they are also seeing at least 3,000 COVID cases per day, and an early influenza season in Argentina, coupled with RSV cases 56% above their highest previous case rate, which was seen in 2019. Chile is also seeing an earlier flu season and a higher rate of RSV this year, with almost 93% of their pediatric critical care beds reportedly filled, necessitating the move in mid-June to bring back masking in schools to help mitigate the spread of viruses among students. And in the Andean region, they are reporting higher than normal levels of influenza and RSV. Repeatedly during the past 3.5 years, we have had a crystal ball to peer into to get a glimpse of what was on the horizon for our children in our winter seasons, and our government and public health leaders have failed to act in accordance with those warnings every single time. In failing to bring back masking in our schools this school year, in failing to provide clean air, in failing to support parents to stay home with sick children, and in failing to support those sick children to stay home while ill, by making vaccinations harder to access via limiting when and where they were provided and by whom, and by bungling the rollout of a wholly unnecessary new vaccination program, we ensured a higher rate of viral spread in our schools. And in doing so, we can't forget that we kept the most at-risk students at higher risk or excluded them from their education, and we allowed for 6 preventable pediatric deaths. But it didn't have to be this way, and it doesn't have to be this way for the next school year. In 2020, not only did we see lower case rates of COVID-19, almost no RSV, we eliminated an entire strain of influenza globally. And we can do that again. What we are doing right now, as we speak, is baking in what our winter will look like. There are already some concerning signs from elsewhere in Canada that children's hospital admissions due to respiratory illnesses are starting to climb, in the summer no less. COVID and other viruses rely on human behavior, and ignoring what we can see happening in other countries while continuing to act like the pandemic is over will bring on the next wave. That is a mathematical fact. Lifting of protections long ago in schools, more recently in healthcare, guarantees us another winter of high pediatric sickness, suffering and hospitalizations, sick teachers and students missing school, parents missing work, too long emergency wait times, and possibly one with another high number of preventable pediatric deaths.
Thanks so much, Jaclyn, for that overview of last year. It's so hard seeing what's happening down in the south and knowing that it's just on its way here without there being any kind of safety measures in place for us.
It is.
I rem-
It's yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I still remember actually with the flu that first year when there was no flu, there was like a single case of flu, and how incredible that was, given how much we work on trying to decrease the impact of flu. And now just going back to that and ignoring that was ever the case in the first place.
Yeah, it's frustrating because I mean, it sounds maybe corny, but I'm a firm believer in know better, do better. So we proved that we could save all of those lives um, from influenza, and now we're choosing to go back to that. It doesn't seem very ethical.
Yeah, and I think it makes it so hard for parents too, knowing, oh, what am I going to do now this year coming up? Sending my kids to school, knowing that there's going to be so much going around without there being any protections there.
It is very difficult. Yeah.
Well, thanks again so much for
Thank
that,
you.
and we'll be bringing you back at the end for questions. And so, having gone over a lot of what happened last year, we're going to talk now about why that's important, and I'll be bringing in Dr. Susan Kuo, who is a Richmond family physician who has been in practice for 30 years. She is also a clinical associate professor at UBC Faculty of Medicine and a member of Protect Our Province BC. Hello, Susan.
Hello.
So nice to see you, both from our offices as we squeeze this in our lunch break. Well, I will let you get to your part of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Karina. First slide, please. While emergencies were overrun by a tripledemic of COVID, RSV, and influenza last fall, family doctors' offices were also swamped full of sick kids and their families. In the 30 years I've been in practice as a family doctor, I've never seen so many sick people. A recent study in JAMA found that 70% of COVID-19 transmissions are from children bringing COVID home to parents, siblings, and grandparents. Last fall, I saw families who were continuously sick from kids catching COVID from schools and daycares. But family doctors in BC could not even diagnose what type of infections these children and families had because only people admitted to hospital had access to PCR testing for COVID. I'm a family doctor in the 21st century, but last fall I might as well have been back in the 19th century because with no testing and no medications available to me, all I could offer my patients was to hold their hands. It was a nightmare. I really hope we don't have to go through this again. Next slide, please. But this coming fall 2023, unlike last year, we no longer have any mask mandates to protect us in BC healthcare settings, including hospitals, cancer centers, and long-term care homes from the tripledemic of COVID, RSV, and influenza. With no masks, there will be an increased transmission and infections of all viruses. With no masks, the most vulnerable people in our society, children, the elderly, and immunocompromised people will be left unprotected. This is why the BC Human Rights Commissioner called the elimination of masks in healthcare settings the violation of vulnerable people's rights. Next slide, please. COVID-19 in children is not mild like a cold. It can affect every system in the body and cause diseases such as diabetes and depression. It can damage the immune system, making people more susceptible to infection. This could explain the increased cases of strep throat, pneumonia, and fungal infections we are seeing in previously healthy children. But some children and adolescents, like adults, do not get better after their COVID infection, with an estimated 10 to 15% becoming disabled with long COVID. As of February 2023 in the UK, which keeps detailed COVID statistics in children, unlike Canada, there are 53,000 children who have long COVID symptoms lasting more than a year. Next slide, please. When we sent our children back to school in the fall of 2020, we thought they were safe. But in fact, during the second year of the pandemic in Canada, there's a surge of 600% in COVID hospitalizations in children. Excess death is defined as a number of deaths from all causes during a crisis such as a pandemic, above and beyond what we would have expected under normal conditions. The number of excess deaths in children ages 0 to 14 in Canada skyrocketed, as you can see, in 2021 and 2022. 2023 is already showing high numbers as well. We are currently in the summer in Canada, but as Dr. Diego Bassani observed, Hospital admissions for respiratory diseases in kids ages 5 to 17 are trending up in the last 7 days, and currently 5 standard deviations above the historical average. Next slide, please. Studies now show that infections with Omicron strains offer very limited protections from reinfection. Reinfection with Omicron strains can happen in as little as 16 days later. Repeated reinfections lead to increased hospitalization, death, and post-acute sequelae in multiple organ systems, also known as long COVID, because of the damage to the immune system. The idea of immunity debt makes no sense. We would never try to protect a person from polio by infecting them with polio, so why would we do this with COVID? This is why immunization is crucial. But as of June 4th, 2023 in BC, only 15% of kids ages 4 and under, 19% of kids ages 5 to 11, and 15% of kids ages 12 to 17 have been fully immunized, comparing to 57% of adults. Next slide, please. We now know that infections with viruses can have effects that may take years to occur. Chickenpox can lead to shingles, EBV can lead to multiple sclerosis, and encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome. After the 1918 flu pandemic, it took 60 years before we saw the full effects on children who caught the virus. These children had a 25% increased rate of heart disease, diabetes, and Parkinson's disease. As adults, they also did not grow as tall or achieve as high level of education as their counterparts who did not get sick with the flu. We still do not know what the effects of COVID-19 will have on our children in the future. This is why we need to protect them now as much as possible from getting infected with COVID and other viruses.
Thanks so much, Susan. It really spoke to me when you were talking about just that the stress as a family doctor when you can't send your patient for testing, which is like the basis of what we do. I've had people who ask me, "Why are you so anxious about COVID?" And I tell them, I'm not anxious about COVID. I am morally outraged and distressed by not being able to do my job and take care of my patients the way I want to.
Exactly. I mean, last fall, we didn't even have Tylenol to give them or even cough medicines to give them, right?
I mean, never in my life have I ever gone to a pharmacy and seen just bare shelves in the kids' medicine section.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but we also had, and still now we'll have like shortages of antibiotics, liquid antibiotics that we give for kids for strep throat and other medication shortages as well, right?
I know, amoxil, erythromycin, they're really hard. Can't get them now. Vaxin. It's incredible.
Hopefully it will be different this fall. But thanks again so much for that presentation, Susan.
Thank you very much, Karina.
And so our last speaker for today is Chantal Moore, who is a science communicator and mother of 2, and also a member of Protect Our Province. Hello, Chantal.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you, Susan, for that excellent explanation of why there's such urgency behind this. So next slide. So I'm going to touch on what we can do ahead of school reopening in September 23 to keep our kids and families safe. Next slide. First of all, we need a change in mindset. As you know, public health has really sent the individual responsibility, you do you narrative. That narrative we know does not work. We have to act as a collective. We can't just think of ourselves and our individual risk when we make decisions on whether or not to wear a mask. We should really think about the most vulnerable people among us, the elderly, children, people with chronic diseases and illnesses. And so we should take that into consideration, and that will help us change the game. Next slide. I'm sure some of you have seen this before. It's the infamous Swiss cheese graphic. The idea behind this is that we need multiple layers of protection so that the virus does not infect us, get through the holes here. So what I wanted to emphasize with this revised edition is that we are really a collective. It cannot just be up to the individual, but multiple layers. So we have family responsibilities, educator responsibilities, school administration and leadership, and government responsibilities. And only by having all these 4 slices of cheese will we really achieve a better pandemic response. Next slide. So here we're going to touch on parents, guardians, and students. This is our first cheese slice. So what can you do as a parent or a guardian or a student? Well, our leaders have really sent the message that it's inevitable. You're going to get COVID. Everyone gets COVID. This is going to be here forever. And I think we have to push back on that narrative and really challenge it, because it's not a very hopeful message. And the reality is there are concrete things we can do that are proven to reduce our infection risk and prevent us from spreading the virus to our loved ones. So the first is get vaccinated if you haven't already for COVID, get boosted, get a flu vaccine this fall. And unfortunately, there's no vaccination for RSV, but we do get the vaccines that we can get. Another thing is send your kids to school in a mask. When we talk about masks, high quality respirators are really the most effective against COVID, being an airborne virus. And there are a lot of options available for kids. Unfortunately, they should be funded by government, and they're not. But so there are barriers to cost for some people. But if you can at all, please send your child to school in a mask. Another thing we can do is have, and this is one that people often forget, but have a safety plan for lunch. You know, if your child wears a mask all day in the class and then they sit in that same class with a bunch of other students and they eat a lunch together, well, COVID doesn't take very long to infect you, right? It can infect you in very brief interactions. So one idea is to eat lunch outside, or maybe there's a room in the school that's more isolated, windows can be opened. Personally, I have sent my daughter home on the days that she was in person school for lunch. Not everyone can do that, though. That's difficult for some. Another thing you can do is please try to keep your child home if they are sick. Not everybody has this privilege and luxury because we don't have the best policies, but if your child is sick and you do not have the means to keep them home, you can send them at the minimum in a high quality respirator and inform the teacher that they are sick, so windows can be open and HEPA filters turn on, etc. And then rapid antigen tests, stock up on these while they're still available. Order some if you can ahead of school starts. Again, not accessible to everyone. Our leaders should really step in, but one thing you should know about rapid tests is you can't assume from a negative result that you are COVID negative. You have to test serially, and you have to, I should say, swab the nose and the mouth. Finally, BC COVID School Tracker. You can, these are fabulous group of parent volunteers. You can inform them via their Twitter feed if you do have an infection outbreak in your school, and they will share that publicly. Next slide. So education workers, second cheese slice. What can you do if you're an education worker? Well, this is an outstanding opportunity to be a role model and a hero to some kids who may be vulnerable and feel shy or uncomfortable masking. So first of all, understand that COVID is transmitted. It's airborne, transmitted via aerosols. So you can have fun games, education opportunities with your kids to explain that it spreads in the air like smoke. You can think of COVID lingers in the air like cigarette smoke. So if you're in one corner of the room and someone else is smoking at the other corner of the room, you can still smell that smoke, right? Unfortunately, we cannot smell COVID. I wish that we could, but so you can think of it that way. It spreads in the air. You can space out desks. This isn't always possible, but in my daughter's school, there was a round table where 4 kids sat very closely together, face to face. This is not ideal. The virus loves this. You can open the windows, you can turn on DYI boxes, HEPA filtration units, and you can also advocate with your unions and administrations. And I should mention that teachers have the 3rd highest WorkSafe BC COVID claims after long-term care and acute care workers. So their health is tied to their students sharing air in the classroom. So as an educator, it's very important that you protect yourself as well. Next slide. School administrators. Okay, so as leadership, you really do have the opportunity to make a difference. You can require masks in the classroom. You can educate students and teachers on the dangers of COVID. And also you do not want your staff frequently absent. We know that there's high absentee rates, and this isn't good for learning, and it's not good for an efficiently run school. So understand aerosol transmission, again, require masks and HVAC, HEPA units, DYI boxes, and also report out on indoor air quality. So deferring to the Ministry of Education or Public Health has not always worked. It has not worked last fall and winter. It's not going to work again. So we really need leadership to step up and change the game. Next slide. Provincial government. This is the thickest slice of cheese. There is a lot that the government can do. They can name it. This is airborne. COVID is airborne. Be brave. Say the word airborne. It's very important that the public is informed. There's a public education campaign on long COVID. We unfortunately haven't seen that mentioned very often, and reinfection risks as well. We know that long-term effects can increase with reinfections, and we really think that the government should run an education campaign on this. Government should also have a fall mask mandate. Jaclyn did a great job showing us the crystal ball of what can be in store if we don't have protections like that, and also making family-friendly fall vaccine rollouts. It's hard to get vaccinated, and it shouldn't be this hard. If you're a single parent, how do you take that time off to vaccinate your child? If you have several children, that could be a whole day or two off work that you might not have. So why not bring vaccines to where parents and kids are, like the schools, for example? Make it really easy and painless to get flu and COVID vaccines. Next slide. And also provincial government, they need to do a better job cleaning air in BC classrooms. IAQ legislation, indoor air quality. We've seen a hopeful sign lately with the ASHRAE has recently updated their standards 241. So, and it's a step in the right direction, and it helps define, what is needed for indoor air quality during times of increased threats, viral threats such as COVID. But we need BC versions of these airborne mitigation standards, and we need public health to take this seriously and adopt them. Next slide. Oh, no more slides.
Thanks so much. That was very useful to help separate it out in terms of, who can do what. Of course, with that last big slice of what the government could do would make everything else a lot easier. Thinking of those slices, Chantal, for you, what are some of the things that you've tried to do in the last year?
I've tried to bring HEPA filters in. I was told that they're noisy, unfortunately. Right now, I'm really working on trying to destigmatize masks. My daughter is feeling self-conscious about it. That's a tough one to get around. And I wish educators would step up and wear a mask for the kids who feel self-conscious.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, RSV. I think I heard that there might be actually RSV vaccine coming out, although not approved yet in Canada, but that would certainly be a great advantage for us here as well, as long as they can roll it out appropriately, unlike last year with flu and COVID. But thanks so much for delineating all of that. I have a few last words, and then we can all come back and chat and take some questions. So what's the takeaway from today? Basically we've been here before, and at this point in the pandemic, we've learned a lot. We know a lot of things that can work, including clean air, masking, what vaccines can or can't do for us. And so there's a lot that we can do. At this point, I think it's quite clear that we can't rely on government and public health at this point to bring in protections. We're going to keep putting pressure on them, but that pressure really needs to come from the bottom up, and we need collective action in order to see change. That change is possible. There's still lots of different groups all around the country, all around the continent, that are doing various things. In New Brunswick, for instance, they were able to pass a Clean Air Act. In Ontario, there's a private member's bill as well, calling for clean air and protection against airborne viruses. And so over the summertime, check out our website, follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We're going to be continuing to put out different actions that people can do, including if you go to our website, protectbc.ca, in the Take Action section, you'll see that there is already a letter that's been formatted and templated that you can send to your MLA asking for clean air so that we can get that legislation covered and in. We will also be having an event August 20th, a type of clean air festival. So make sure that you check out our social media for more information about that. We have a newsletter and lots of useful information on our website as well. Here in Vancouver, the DPAC, so the District Parent Advisory Committee, also put a motion, passed a motion for clean air. So there is definitely momentum happening there. We just need to keep it up. And so we will take some questions now, and then I will call back Chantal and Jaclyn and Susan to answer them. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So our first question here is, how do we prevent bullying of kids that are still masking, especially when they're the only ones in class? And certainly I know I've been hearing this from many friends where their kids seem to be the last ones, and sometimes there's teasing and other things, and the kids are feeling just a lot of pressure, which, you know, especially when you have medical reasons for masking, is particularly awful. Anybody here have experiences like that to share, or strategies?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to go first, Chantal, or do you want?
You go ahead.
We have faced this a little bit, especially with our youngest. I mean, I think one excellent way of doing it, of course, which Chantal touched on, would be the modeling. So if the adults in the school, like there are some schools where we've heard where there's like a principal or a teacher, and they say that they will mask as long as there's a single child masking in the school, they will continue to mask because it shows solidarity and gives the child a little bit of like support. So at an adult level, that would be really amazing. Things we do with our kids though is we talk about it. We talk about why we're doing it. Like they're very aware of why we continue masking. But we also talk about how it's not only to protect ourselves. Like sometimes we have to go to the hospital or specialists for appointments. And so we don't know that we weren't exposed. So we continue masking because then we know we're also protecting our friends. And I think that helps sometimes too when we reframe it. But it is certainly difficult. And especially, I mean, our youngest is just finishing kindergarten. And so every time she's gotten sick this year, save for the one time when my husband picked up a healthcare acquired infection, every time she's gotten sick this year was when she's taken her mask off at school. And at least one of those times was peer pressure. And so that's been a really difficult situation to deal with as well, because she doesn't like being sick. So, you know, yeah, it's just constant conversation. Yeah.
How about you, Chantal?
I totally agree with what you said, like leadership and role modeling. And our public health has cast masks as a negative, like a restriction, you know, a limitation, you're not free. And I really think we need to turn that around and cast them as a positive, like a symbol of love and you know, compassion for our community. And so I try to instill that message with my kids. It's difficult with my older child. She's almost in the teenage years, and there's a sense of rebellion. I'm struggling with that. I've heard other parents are struggling with that too. And I think that's where peers and teachers wearing a mask would help.
I totally agree. And I think we put mask mandates in, we did it all wrong. Instead of telling people, and people are very smart, the reasons why you need to mask, right? To protect yourself, to protect others against this very dangerous virus. We just put this mask mandate without explaining the reason why. And so when they got rid of mask mandates, people didn't understand, the real reason why you needed a mask, right? And I think if people were made to know the reasons, they would be much more, wanting their kids to mask and much more bought into it.
Yeah, I think there's really a huge responsibility on the side of the adults, to support kids in school wearing masks and to take that on. And we were talking about maybe even coming up with a letter that parents could use to take to school to kind of bring that message back a bit stronger too, which I think would be really useful. Could we get the next question, please? I got COVID last month. Does that mean I'm good now? Anybody would like to, we're all like, oh no.
Definitely not. I get that question all the time, unfortunately. I get patients coming and say, oh, I'm good now, right? I've got COVID. So unfortunately not true, because I think I mentioned in my talk earlier, there's been cases where people have got COVID, 16 days later from reinfection from one of the new variants. And unfortunately, with the new variants, unlike with the older strains like Alpha and Delta, the immunity you get after infection is not as long lasting, right? And then even immunizations, they're very protective, but they last about 4 or 5 months. So that's why it's important to keep up with the booster shots, right? And so when you get that notification, come get your boosters, please go and do it. It's really important.
Absolutely. And the other thing too that I will hear is like, oh yeah, I had COVID and it was actually not that bad. So now I don't have to worry about it. But now, having seen people with multiple episodes of COVID, one COVID infection is not necessarily like the next, and you still have all of those long-term risks with each infection.
Yeah.
So even though you've had a mild case, doesn't mean that the next one will be mild or not have longer-term issues afterwards.
For sure. I mean, I see patients and I'm seeing them sometimes after their third infection, and they say, well, I didn't bother calling you for the first two, but this time I'm really sick, right? And, repeated infections, it probably is damaging the immune system, right, from the studies. So it's obviously not good to keep on getting these infections. And then, like Karina said, we don't even know what the long-term damage is going to be, right? We already know from some of the studies that the first year in the Veteran Affairs study that there's a double risk of heart disease. There's 1.6 times risk of stroke, right? And also there's increased risk of valve disease of the heart, blood clots, lung blood clots. So this is not a mild disease.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, long COVID, and the risk doesn't go away if you've already had COVID once before. So, and I think as parents, oh, kids come home sick again. Do we have to test again for COVID? Can't we just, they seem fine. But it's just important, if you have those symptoms to still test, not just once, but like again, 48 hours later, to make sure that you don't have it and that you're not spreading it.
And make sure you swab the back of the throat and both nostrils, because quite a few patients will say, oh, I'm negative. And then I'll go, okay, did you swab your throat? No, I didn't. They'll go back and swab it and they phone back. They're positive.
Absolutely. Chantal and Jaclyn, anything else you wanted to add to that last question?
Just on Susan's point, I hear a lot like, oh, I swabbed, I'm negative, I'm sure it's just a cold. Well, we don't want to be spreading cold, influenza, RSV to others as well. We know those can kill people and cause long-term problems. You can get a cold, you can have a sinus infection for weeks after, you can be out of work for a week or two and you might not have sick pay. So we really are just, it's disappointing that after this pandemic and we've found solutions to prevent, transmission, we still are going back to, 2019.
Yeah, I echo all of that.
Agree.
Yeah.
Could we have the next question, Karen? Why should children be vulnerable this year again if they were exposed to the same viruses last year? And so I think this question is a bit maybe along the immunity debt line. Perhaps?
Right. So immunity debt is not true. It doesn't exist, right? And like we said, why would you think of that you should get infected with polio to protect you against polio? Why would you try to get infected, have someone infected with HIV to protect them from HIV? We would never do that with any of those viruses. So why would we do this with COVID? It makes no sense.
Yeah.
No, for sure. Chantal, Jaclyn,
No.
any thoughts there?
No. I mean, yeah.
It seems like
Yeah.
such an odd concept to like get somebody sick in order to prevent them from
Yeah.
them from getting sick.
It doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Getting sick
Yeah.
at all. I think too, the other thing about this is that our immune system is always working. It's never on pause. So even during times when we were very restricted in who we could see, your immune system was still going 100%. So kids don't have to be exposed to any kind of bug in order to be able to then be able to fight it better. So yeah. And then I think we may have another question or two left. So we have, how can we deal with school administrators, teachers who actively oppose COVID precautions? That's a really great question. Anybody want to have a go at it?
Yeah, it's really difficult. I mean, we're in, I mean, I started letter writing before they reopened the schools in June 2020. And we still haven't really gained a whole lot of ground on that. So it's really difficult. I mean, a common refrain is that we hear that they're following public health, like even though we know that public health guidelines are a floor, not a ceiling, and that, teachers, for example, teachers, but also admin can choose to make the spaces safer and more inclusive. They often default to the government talking points. And so that's been really difficult. When I'm doing, I continue to provide studies and information. I try always to personalize the story. So I explain why we take the precautions that we do, because what I find, especially when I do it in person, when I write an email and I say, my kid, when he was diagnosed with one of his rare diseases, he was one of 10 people that was diagnosed in the entire world. So out of 7.5 billion people, there were only 10 people diagnosed with this rare disease, and he's one of them. And I write that in an email, and I think people see it, but don't necessarily process it. But when we talk it out, it makes it more real. It doesn't mean that we're actually like winning in any of the discussions or anything like that, but I continue trying to personalize it because I hope that eventually one day I'll get through to one person that would be like, okay, wow, like what can we do to protect your kid and other kids like them? And again, and I know I've said it frequently, is if we make places like schools safe for those who are most vulnerable, then they're safer for everyone. It's not actually like we're making, that we're like giving them like special treatment. We're actually just making places safer. And it doesn't make sense that we wouldn't, but yeah, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and I think, Jaclyn, I know that you've also made the point before that people don't always know an underlying condition that their child might have or that an adult might have, and so getting sick with COVID or flu or other airborne pathogens might reveal that extra vulnerability that people have. And so and even I mean, we should protect everybody, but we should particularly protect those who are more vulnerable, and that's a value. And either you have that value or you don't.
Yeah, I think it's something like 40%, 37 point something, but rounding up, 40% of the population has an underlying condition, and most of them don't know. So, yeah.
Yeah, I find it could be tricky as well in the school. All of a sudden, with the pandemic, being able to know, who are your allies, because they're maybe not the same allies that you might have had before. And I think some people would, be masking, but feel like there's so much pressure not to, that they they aren't. And so trying to find those people, I think, can be a bit tricky.
But do you remember that survey they did in BC, and they asked people in BC, was it in favor of mandatory masks? And surprisingly, 70% of people said yes, they were. So you'd be surprised. There's people that do care about this, and I think we shouldn't give up. It's a very difficult issue for sure, but I think sometimes if you bring that personal point to it about your family and what you're going through, I think a lot of the administrators actually are receptive, right?
Yeah, and our human rights commissioner definitely thinks that from a human rights perspective, we should be masking, because it's, yes, people who are medically vulnerable, but we also know that low income people, racialized people, Indigenous people are also a lot more vulnerable to COVID. Gender diverse people are more vulnerable. So just all the more reason to try to have everybody protect one another. There's a school down in Texas called Abrome, ABROME, and they have had no COVID throughout the whole pandemic. And if you read their COVID precaution part of their website, it's just so full of everybody being there for one another and doing what we need, and then being able to learn in a healthy space, because it's not just COVID, it's also or other bugs, it's also fire, smoke, and air pollutants. And I think, Susan, you brought up before, like with HEPA filters, also the benefits in terms of learning in general.
Yeah, by increasing ventilation, they done studies that showed it improves scores in math, reading, and science. So amazing, right?
Well, and then also, so like Susan said, that 70%, they showed that 70% of cases came from a child into a house. So that means that they haven't spread that back out into their community. So then it creates like a net positive. They're not feeding it back out. It's not coming back into the school. So their community is also a little bit better protected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I believe that is there one? There might be one more question. We're all laughing because we all get this question a lot.
You know what? I will tell you, I am going to mask from now on when I go to any hospital settings, right? I can remember in the past when I've gone to, before COVID, I didn't always mask in the hospital. But now I know, wow, maybe I'm carrying some virus I could pass on to my vulnerable patients. So whenever I go to hospital or nursing home settings, I'm going to continue masking. I don't want to expose my patients to that.
Yeah, I've enjoyed not being sick for the last year.
Yeah, me too.
And having to take time off or that kind of thing. So
our kids don't have to take their asthma medication anymore. Like, it's amazing. Like, because their asthma was viral induced. They haven't had to take their medication, save for the one time from the hospital or the healthcare acquired infection. They did need it a little bit then, but generally for the entirety of the last few winters, they pretty much haven't. And that's amazing. Like,
yeah. You look at the stats, when we were all masking, influenza, RSV are practically non-existent, right?
Yeah, I used to live in Japan, and they were totally normalized there. We had like 5-year-old students, a room full of masks, and no big deal.
Yeah, I think
it doesn't
also
have to be a hard thing.
No, I was just going to say the other thing too is what I was trying to touch on is that it's our actions now that dictate what's going to happen in the future. But it's the same with masking. Our actions now mean that we're going to have to mask for longer. So like, yes, I will still mask in all like risky situations going forward because it is nice not being sick. But for the people who are just so gung-ho to drop them, the longer we don't start paying attention to the fact that we're in a pandemic, the longer we're going to have to do stuff like this because we're just perpetuating it. So yeah.
It's kind of like asking, do we have to wear condoms forever?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you're going to be sexually active, if you're out there interacting with people, then that's how we protect ourselves, right? So it's just a tool, like lots of other tools. Seatbelts is another one that tends to come up often in this case. But it's we have to mask forever. I guess for as long as we care about the health of other people and our children, probably we will be masked.
people in Asia are doing it pre-pandemic. They're still doing it
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
It's a weird way psychologically to look at things. Like you would never say, "Do I need to do dishes forever?" Like you'd be pretty depressed. Thought about 40 years of dishes every day, but no one asked that. It's like we shouldn't ask that.
Yeah.
mhm.
Definitely a cultural shift that needs
Yeah.
that needs to happen for sure. Well, I believe that was our last question. Thank you so much, all three of you, for being here and taking time off of your busy days to share your knowledge and your wisdom. It's deeply appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And so I just wanted to let folks know that we do have a list of resources here. You'll be able to find these slides. The video will be uploaded to our website, again, protectbc.ca, or you can find it on our YouTube channel as well. So feel free to check out any of those resources. Thank you so much again for being here today.